Everything is Fine by Great 78. Chapter 4. Curses. Hermione's elbow and forearm pushed Draco forcefully against the sparkling lavender door, a wand gripped in her hand. She shoved it hard into his jaw. "I don't know what kind of sick forking game you're playing here, Malfoy, but you will let me out of it now, you vile plaster. Or, Merlin help me, I will end you. Do I make myself clear?" Time seemed to stretch as Draco struggled to keep up with her words. She was standing close, frighteningly close. He could feel heat radiating off her body, and Salazar help him, he was a little turned on. Maybe more than a little, which was ridiculous. "Kindly remove your hands from me, you crazy—" Draco spat out. "Crazy what? What were you about to call me, Malfoy? A spudflood?" she asked in a menacing voice. His brow wrinkled to hear what came from her mouth. What the fuck had that been? They locked eyes where they stood, both torn between anger and amusement. She broke first, perhaps aware for the first time that she was leaning so hard into him to pin him to the door that her entire body was touching his. She looked down and began to step away, but as she did so, he seized her wrist, wresting the slender wand from her hand. "Petrificus totalis," he said, whipping the confiscated wand in the correct pattern. She threw her arms to the side in a dismissive, disgusted gesture at him. "It's not a wand, dipshit. Doesn't work." His eyes bugged from his head. "Then why'd you forking draw it on me, Granger? And why can't I say fork? Fork. Fork! Ah, fork me!" "No forking, thank you, Malfoy," Granger said, snatching back the pretend wand from his hand, dropping it onto a nearby table and going to sit on the sofa in an angry huff. He followed her, standing in front of the massive screen. "Why am I saying fork instead of fork, Granger? And were you trying to say spudflood earlier? What's going on?" She sighed and grabbed a nearby throw pillow to put under her head, lying back on the sofa and looking up at the ceiling. She stretched her smooth, muscular legs, bare under the tiniest pair of short trousers Draco had ever seen. He lost his train of thought for a different reason. "What's going on is... Shirt, I don't even know. We're in some kind of weird simulation, I think. Or maybe we're having a collective psychotic break." She popped one eye open to look at him. "Have you ever dropped acid?" He looked at her, at a complete loss for words. "What does that even mean, Granger?" She sighed again. "Yeah, I haven't either. As for the cursing, I don't know. We just aren't able to say the words we intended to say. Not sure why. I don't understand it either." He paced back and forth in front of the screen, carding his fingers through his platinum blonde hair. He thought for a moment that the Cornish pixies inside his mind were arguing, but then he realized it was the low hubbub of noise coming from the screen. "Granger, can we turn this off? I know you apparently are obsessed with Muggle television now, but—" She interrupted him. "No, we can't. Like Ariel said, it comes on at 6 o'clock in the morning and turns off at 10 o'clock in the evening. The best I can do is turn it down to a very low volume." Draco stared at her for a moment in disbelief, before turning away, his annoyed breath ruffling his blonde fringe. "I don't fucking believe it." Granger sighed a long, suffering sigh, and turned her body on the sofa to face him. Her arm draped the curve of her side, and Draco dragged his eyes away with a bit of difficulty. When the fuck had Granger gotten so fit, he wondered. "Come off it!" The Cornish pixies jeered at him. "That's not the first time that thought has occurred to you. We're inside your brain, you know." "And for the record, I don't care one whit about television, particularly this horrid program," she groused in annoyance. Draco turned to study the screen. It appeared to be a group of young people sitting around a Muggle kitchen, talking animatedly with each other. He resumed his pacing. "Would it be too much to ask to get a chair in here for me so that I can sit as well?" he grumbled, not wanting to approach her legs. "Dobby," Granger said in a resigned voice to the room at large. There was a chime sound, and his father's former house elf appeared in the room with them. "Holy shit! Abso-forking-lutely not!" Draco said, turning as if to go out of the sugary sweet purple door. Granger sat up swiftly. "What's wrong?" "That's Dobby. He was my father's elf. I didn't particularly enjoy my time with him on Earth. Besides, he's dead," Draco rambled, turning back with his hand on the lemon sherbet doorknob to look at the two of them. He tried very hard to keep his eyes averted from the tiny elf. "According to Ariel, we're dead too," Granger supplied, with a sarcastic roll of her eyes. "Yes, but—" He stepped closer to her, boxing the elf out of the conversation. "Granger, my father, you can't imagine—" "You can't imagine the nightmares I've had about that elf," he wanted to say. "A lot like the nightmares I had about you." But the words would not come to his lips. She rolled her eyes again. "Not to worry, Malfoy, it's not actually Dobby. I asked. Apparently it is some sort of all-knowing, all-providing, non-living being. Like a computer that can provide you with almost anything you could ask for, only it looks and speaks like a living creature. Does that make sense?" Draco had a vague idea that a computer was a Muggle contraption, but that was where his knowledge on the subject ended. However, he said, "I suppose so." Clearly his ignorance was written on his face because Granger elaborated. "It was explained to me that the helper appears to each person as a different being. So, if your mother was particularly helpful to you on Earth, your helper might remind you of your mother, or a special teacher, perhaps. Apparently, for both of us, we thought of house elves as useful creatures." Her voice dripped with disdain. He chuckled to himself. He could imagine how much it pained little Miss Stop Pureblood's exploitative ways, or the Society for the Pitiful Elfish Waifs, or whatever it was that she had started during their 4th year, to admit that she found poor, enslaved house elves to be helpful. He turned to the Dobby helper. "I'd like a chair." Dobby nodded, and there was a chime noise once again. A straight-back wooden chair appeared in the room. No, an armchair," he corrected quickly. Another chime, and the chair had stiff wooden arms. He sighed deeply. "I mean a chair with padding, sort of—" Granger exhaled a long-suffering sigh and stood, coming over to the elf, speaking kindly to him. "Dobby, can you please get Malfoy an oversized rocker recliner in black leather with a power footrest? Make sure that it has a heat function, cup holders, and a remote for the telly built in, and a lamp next to it for reading." Another chime, and the most glorious chair Draco had ever seen appeared. He approached it with something close to awe. "Blimey, this is amazing." She pursed her lips. "My father had one just like it. He and my mother shopped for it for months, when he wasn't at work or jogging or working in the garden. He lived in that chair." Draco sat gingerly at first, then sunk into the chair as though falling into the caress of an old lover. His eyes closed in near ecstasy. "Merlin, this is brilliant." Granger rolled her eyes once more, and returned to the sofa. Draco opened his eyes and turned to look at her. "I'm feeling peckish, I think. Do we get peckish?" "You don't for long. Everything you ask for tastes like cardboard here." "What?" Draco had expected that the taste of food might suffer a bit of a lag, but cardboard. He sat up in alarm. Granger smiled almost nastily. Didn't Ariel tell you that? Only the things in the restaurant over in the square taste like they're intended to.
But cardboard,
Draco said a bit miserably. It might not even be that it tastes like cardboard, it's just that it looks so delicious and sumptuous when it's brought to you that your brain can't help but think it's going to be amazing. And then you're disgusted when you eat it. It's like eating a water biscuit spread with mayonnaise.
Fuck, that sounds revolting,
Draco bletched. Lucky for you, there's a wide variety of options out in the square, Granger said with a hint of a smirk.
Lucky for me? Granger, I can't tell you how much I hate bananas.
It was her turn to sit up in shock. What? How? I was told that the banana was chosen specifically because it was one of the most favoured foods among the people living here. For Godric's sake, every time I venture out into the square, it looks like people are having orgasms as they stuff these banana concoctions down their throats. This phrase and visual took Draco's pixie brain in another direction entirely. Some of the pixies had begun salivating at the very sound of Granger's voice saying the word orgasm. He mentally slapped the closest pixie and refocused.
So, you don't like bananas. You don't like the telly. You don't like the food here. You don't like the house elves. Am I to assume that you aren't the world's biggest consumer of sugary sweets either? He mused.
Granger fixed him with a look of utter disdain. Malfoy, my parents were dentists. I didn't grow up eating sweets. An apple was a dessert in my home most of the time.
Draco had no idea what a dentist was, but he got the gist. An apple sounds delicious right about now. Can I have an apple?
Draco said, and was surprised by the small chime sound indicating Dobby. The elf silently presented him with a shiny green apple, and disappeared again. He bit into it with relish, and chewed for a few seconds with a small smile on his face. Then his jaw slowed and stopped.
Fuck me. It tastes like mushy water.
Granger nodded as he forced down the bite, then settled the apple on the low table in front of him.
Right. So the house isn't your design either?
No. And I'm not a vegetarian either. In fact, I would kill for a steak with garlic butter served medium rare right now. As for what's going on here, until about 20 minutes ago, I thought I had a pretty firm grip on what was going on here, but then you showed up and all of my theories went to shit. Draco leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, looking intently at Granger. If she had a theory, chances were it was well thought out.
What have you come up with?
She sighed and threw her arm over her eyes. This pulled her blouse higher at the waist and revealed a sliver of smooth, creamy skin, just above the short trousers. Several of the Cornish pixies began to dance, and Draco mentally punched one of them in the face to serve as an example to the others. Well, in the beginning I was rather out of it, to be honest. It seemed like one moment I was standing in Diagon Alley, and the next I was in an office waiting room. It was like a weird dream. I felt like I was underwater, if that makes sense.
Draco nodded. It had felt a bit like swimming up from darkness to light, now that he thought about it.
Ariel called me in, or at least I was fairly sure she did. I was the only one in the room, and she was looking right at me when she spoke. She started to explain, and she seemed so confident, you know? In the beginning, I took her words at face value. I mean, she had plenty of answers for all of your questions, don't you agree?
Well, to be honest, I didn't ask many questions,
Draco admitted uncomfortably. Judging from her reaction, Granger considered this blasphemous. He turned away to avoid allowing her to see how amused he was by that. Two of the people on the giant screen now appeared to be kissing whilst half-naked under the covers. Draco's eyebrows shot up slightly in surprise.
Granger might not be interested in this, but he found he didn't mind too much. He forced his eyes away as the couple continued to undress, putting his eyes back on Granger. No help there. Her blouse had written up even higher, and the sliver of skin was now nearly a hand's width. Draco took a deep breath and looked up at the ceiling, which was mercifully temptless. "So, she had a pretty convincing argument at first. What changed your mind?"
"Well, after we talked, we walked through the town square, which is positively awful looking, by the way."
"Agreed."
"But to each his own. Then she started discussing the restaurants. We stopped at a place called It's the Peel Deal. They serve fried banana peels, cut into sticks and salted and fried, to look like chips." The disdain in Granger's voice was evident. Draco felt the watery apple coming back up on him.
"Oof."
"Quite," said Granger, sitting up now and tugging her blouse down to cover her midriff again. Draco's pixies launched a silent protest. "Where did she take you?"
"Some kind of banana bread bakery. Mine was banana carrot, I think." He shuddered.
"Ghastly," she declared, and Draco agreed again. Who knew he and Granger had this much in common? Besides Ariel, apparently. The only item in there worth a nut is the chocolate banana bread, and half the time they seem to run out of it before I can get there to get a slice. Draco made a mental note to try this version of the bread at his earliest opportunity.
"Right, so the food isn't great. Presumably everyone else loves it, at least based upon how many people were out there eating today."
"True. Well, then we arrived at this monstrosity." Hermione just turned to their surroundings. "At first I thought she was joking, telling me that this was mine and my soulmate's dream home. But then I played back in my head the first bit of the conversation with her from earlier. You see, at one point in the conversation whilst we ate, she called me hollow. At the time I chalked it up to her being confused. That seemed odd in itself, an all-knowing being seeming confused. But that evening I began playing back our entire conversation, from when she called my name in her office at the very beginning."
"Harlow Garamond,"
Draco supplied. "Precisely. There was no way she would have made such a colossal mistake when we first met, surely. So, for the last few weeks I've been trying to come up with all manner of hypotheses to try and reason a possible answer."
"And what conclusions did you reach?"
Draco asked, as though they were back in arithmancy class, where they'd occasionally been reluctant partners.
"Just partners, dipshit. Nothing reluctant on your part," the brain pixies taunted him.
"At first I thought it was a really strange and vivid dream, but it just kept going. Then I assumed I was experiencing psychosis, some sort of extended psychotic break. But I had no indicators of that. My thoughts were perfectly rational inside my own head. Then I thought perhaps this was some elaborate plan of an enemy of mine," she said.
Draco nodded. He would be lying to himself if he hadn't thought the same. And, to be honest, he could think of more than a few people who would be happy to torture him, just a tiny bit. The person sitting in the room with him, for instance. Her testimony and that of her friends at his trial after the war had been vital, the linchpin that had secured his freedom. But he knew it had not been given because of the goodness in his heart, but rather from the sense of justice within hers. And Granger certainly had her share of enemies amongst his father's acquaintances. She was the golden girl in the Daily Prophet, but he had heard plenty of Death-Eaters refer to her as that mudblood bitch over the years. "It's not a bad theory," Draco said thoughtfully.
"The only problem is, if this is torture, they're doing a shirt job of it. There are far too many wonderful things about the good place," she mused.
"Such as?"
"Well, the flying lessons.
I was never a big fan of flying on broomsticks, or anything, really," she said, and Draco snorted in laughter. Weasley had recounted to Witch Weekly the tale of their escape from Gringotts Bank, on the back of an ancient, half-blind dragon. He said they'd been on the back of it for hours, hanging on for dear life in that cold spring day. Draco imagined that he would no longer be a fan of flying either after that. She continued, after shooting him a quelling look. "But the flying lessons were nice. I don't know how to describe it, but it's as though my sense of fear is gone." He nodded slowly. He had noticed the same thing, a lack of the pervasive fear that followed him everywhere on Earth. It had been on the forefront of his mind for the entirety of the war. Then, after its conclusion, the general sense of unease had followed him. He had been able to cover it up, learned to cope and to live with it in the last few years, but it was ever present during his life on Earth for these past several years, except for here. Even through his moments of confusion or disgust, he realized now that the fear had not accompanied him here. Granger went on. "And that's a bit scary, in and of itself. I mean, all of this is so unusual. Shouldn't I be fearful?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, not just as an old classmate or enemy or mudblood whose hair he'd been preternaturally focused on for much of his school years. There were many words he would use to describe Hermione Granger, but fearful had never been one of them. He took a chance and voiced a bit of this to her. "Never known you to back down from any sort of challenge, Granger," he said, trying and failing to make it sound snarky. He was rewarded with a fleeting smile that Granger tamped down immediately. "Thanks, I guess, Malfoy. But it isn't really just the flying lessons. The people are all really nice. Everyone I've met has been friendly and open. None of them are magical folk, as far as I can tell, but they all seem so accepting." Something in her words snagged in Draco's brain. The fact that she found it remarkable that strangers could be so accepting of her. That had not been her experience on Earth, he knew firsthand. He pushed this thought away uncomfortably. Hermione closed her eyes and leaned back on the sofa, lacing her fingers behind her head. "So, no, the good generally outweighs the not-so-good here, so I don't think this is some sort of enemy plot. Besides, it's rather elaborate. One would need more money than Jim to set this up, and the only enemies I have with enough money to do it." At this, she stopped speaking abruptly and opened her eyes quickly. "Are me and my family," Draco finished for her. "I was going to say are in prison or dead," she said lamely. "But yes, I suppose, perhaps." "Granger, I can assure you, if I were going to torture you, this wouldn't be how I would go about it," he said. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, and her eyes widened. Too late he realized what that had sounded like. I didn't mean—" "Shut up, shut up," the brain pixies chanted. He shut up. "When you arrived, I assumed that the theory had been correct, that this was some sort of enemy plot." "And now?" Draco wasn't sure why he was holding his breath. Now I'm uncertain. When Ariel was here, you seemed so confident, so at ease with this whole idea of the good place." Draco smiled ruefully, heartily glad that Granger wasn't a Legilimens. "But then I watched you try to eat that apple, and it seemed as though it was just as tasteless as everything I've asked for. Plus, you clearly wouldn't have chosen that particular elf as your elf as well," she went on. "Decidedly not," Draco answered. "I suppose not, considering he betrayed your father," challenged Hermione. "That's not... whatever. No. I just wouldn't have chosen him," Draco finished quickly.
"So now my theories about this place are moving back to my original conclusion," sighed Hermione.
"Which are?"
She drew in a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "That we did die, and that this is some sort of afterlife, and that, at least in my case, a grave mistake was made."
"Mistaken identity, you mean? Harlow Garamond?"
"No," Hermione said quickly. She stood and began to pace in front of the now sleeping people on the screen. "Well, yes, clearly they've mixed me up with someone else, but it isn't just that." She stopped and looked him directly in the eye, her copper eyes haunted and worried. "Malfoy, I don't belong here. I didn't do enough good in my life to earn a spot in the good place."
Thank you for listening to Everything is Fine by Great78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to read more like it, please find me on Archive of Our Own or follow my Spotify channel, Silver and Copper.